which is called Russian Intelligence from Lenin to Putin. So my name is Jenny Mathers, and I work on Russia, Russian security, the Russian military, Russian politics, and increasingly I'm interested in Russian intelligence. And this is a module that I taught last year, and for the first time last year, and found it really enjoyable. And so I'm glad to be offering it again next year. So if you're a first year, you might know me from convening Behind the Headlines, and also that I taught one lecture on War Strategy Intelligence module about intelligence, and talked a little bit about this module in that. If you're a year 2 student, you might have taken my Russian security module, which ran in semester 1 this year. So I'll talk a little bit about the way that this module complements the Russian security module in a minute. So what I'll be covering in this briefing is basically talking about what the module covers, and the sort of underpinning logic behind it. I'll talk about why it might be of interest to you, whether you have a specific interest in Russia or not. And I will talk about the structure of the module, go through each of the different seminars that we offer, talk about the assessment, because that's important, a little bit about a few extra things, and then we'll kind of see where we end up. So let's move on to the next slide. So coverage of the module. You will notice that Lenin and Putin are both carrying cats, which amused me. I found this picture of Lenin with a cat when I was looking for a picture of Lenin, and then it reminded me of this picture of Putin with a cat. So I thought I would use those two. The scope of the module is basically 100 years, more or less. So we're looking from 1917, when the Bolsheviks took power in Russia, to the current day, so 2020, 2021, when Putin is, we assume, will still be in control when the module runs next year. We do a little bit of pre-1917 background. So start really the first lecture by talking about the Tsarist secret police, the Okhrana, how they were organized, but also what kinds of experiences the Bolsheviks had with the Okhrana, because their experiences in opposition, as you know, sort of hounded opponents and enemies of the regime, people who were actively trying to take it down, really affect the way that they construct their own security and intelligence services after they're in power. It tells them what kinds of things they think they're looking for. They adopt some of the same kinds of techniques as the Tsarist secret police, but they also add things which they think are going to be more effective. Having been in that position of opponents of the state, they feel like they have a really good insight into how to deal with future opponents of the state. So we go back a little bit, as I say, before 1917, but basically the module is looking at 1917 onwards. We look sequentially, so it's in chronological order, looking at first how the Bolsheviks established the Cheka, which was their first intelligence service, and how that changes over time. So we're looking at structure, at organizations, as well as key actors and individuals who are involved. But we're also looking at the way that the culture of intelligence changes, because those of you who've looked at the way that intelligence works in other countries may notice that there are distinct national cultures around how it works, the relationship between the intelligence services and the government, the kinds of things they focus on, the kinds of strategies and tactics and approaches that they use. So the development of that distinctly Soviet and then Russian culture of intelligence is kind of a theme that'll run through the module. We look at both internal and external dimensions of intelligence, because one of the constant themes in the Soviet and Russian cases is that there's always a search for enemies within, as well as concern about dealing with enemies of the regime from other states and outside. So this is a constant theme that we're going to be looking at: internal, external dimensions, how they never really can rest. They're never really comfortable, never feel safe. So they're always looking for these enemies, both internal and external. We also look at continuity and change. Some of the aspects of the way that the FSB and Putin's intelligence service operate now we can trace right back through, nearly 100 years in the making. Other things have developed and changed over time. So that's one of the really interesting facets, I think, of the module, is seeing, if you're looking at sort of contemporary examples of Russian intelligence activity, seeing where that comes from, and seeing why they do the things that they do as they do them. There is a little bit of overlap with the Russian security module, but not a great deal, because the Russian security module, those of you who took it this year, or who might want to take it in the future if you're a first year, the Russian security module is very contemporary. Apart from one little bit at the beginning about Gorbachev, we're really looking at sort of post-1992, post-Soviet Russia. And it's a very close focus on contemporary issues of security, and it ranges more widely within that close focus of a time period across different kinds of security. So we look at the armed forces and defense, as well as a little bit around the intelligence services. This module is got to focus squarely on intelligence. Yes, it's embedded within a wider context of what's happening in Russian politics and security issues, but the focus is always on the intelligence services and what they're doing, but over a much longer period of time. So there's a little bit of overlap, but not a great deal. And plenty of students have taken both modules and found that they complement each other, rather than feeling that they're just covering the same ground again and again. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. So the overview of the module really, and part of this is the advertising part, which is why should you take it? Why is it interesting? I mean, you only have to scratch the surface of any sort of news reporting, even of the current pandemic, to see that there's interest in what Russia might or might not be doing in relation to that thing. So Russia has become, and Russian intelligence in particular, has become this real fascination for policymakers, for the media, for society at large. Some people looking to find Russian intelligence as the guiding hand behind absolutely everything that happens. Other people seeing it as having sort of no relevance at all. And you can see quite how contentious and topical this is if you consider the very recent New York Times article all about how Putin is responsible for people who are questioning the science around the coronavirus. And Bellingcat did a really good, detailed dissection of what was wrong with that New York Times article and where they made assumptions and relied upon unreliable sources where they shouldn't have done if they'd known more what they were doing. So I've tweeted that link, but if you're interested, have a look at the Bellingcat website, and they'll have all those details there. So you can see side by side, the claims and then the unpicking of the claims. It's really very fascinating. So part of the logic of this module is actually to give you some of those tools of understanding what Russian intelligence is and isn't, what it can and can't do, where they put their emphasis and their efforts and where they don't, so that you, as informed citizens in the future, can make your own judgments about these things. But you're going to have a little bit more to go on it than a lot of people do out there in the world. So the module is, as I mentioned, it's going to allow you to put contemporary claims and contemporary issues around Russian intelligence into a broader historical perspective. It's going to give you a real good sense of sort of continuity and change. It's also going to give you the chance to engage with a wide range of academic literature on the subject, but also quite a bit of memoir literature. So some former spies and former people who were highly placed in the Russian intelligence services, as well as some of those who spied for Russia as Western citizens, have written their own accounts of what they did and why they did it. So we're going to have a chance to read some of those. So hopefully that will be of interest to you. The module should be interesting if you've got an interest in Russia and you want to know more about Russian intelligence, as well as if you have a broader interest in intelligence studies more generally and you want a contrasting case, because a lot of what we offer as a department in terms of intelligence studies is very Western-centric. We focus on the US case, we focus on UK, but this module will definitely give you a strong sense of sort of the other side of that argument. So that's my pitch. Let's move on and talk about the nuts and bolts of things. The structure of the module, we have 18 one-hour lectures, and they are delivered 2 lectures a week. We have 8 one-hour seminars, and I let the lectures get ahead of the seminars a bit so that you're always have the chance to hear and indeed ask questions in my lectures the week before the seminars happen. So it introduces you a bit to the topics. Now, lectures always are useful, I hope, for students in giving them sort of broader background and more information that helps them in their reading. But I think in this module it's particularly important because a lot of the readings, unfortunately, are very demanding. A lot of the historians and the people who write about these issues are so closely tied to their studies. They're so immersed in the topic that they often don't give you a lot of context, and so sort of plunge you straight into the detail and expect you already to know how these things fit into a broader context and what on earth they're talking about. So I'm hoping in my lectures that I'm going to give you a lot of that context so that when you go to the reading, you already understand some of these key questions and you already know more or less what they're talking about, and then you can just jump into the detail and that will help you. So that's the aim. So I think the lectures are particularly important for this module where the readings are quite demanding. One of the unusual things about this module is the way that the seminars are going to be conducted. So rather than have you do presentations, which I do in my Russian security module, in this module, I actually ask students to lead one of the seminar discussions, right? Now, that sounds a bit scary, but actually, when I taught this module last year, it worked extremely well, and the students really enjoyed it. So what we do is in the first seminar, I will obviously lead the first seminar discussions and talk about how that works in practice. And you have the chance to sign up in that first seminar to which of the following ones you're going to lead. And in most cases, what works best is if students work either in pairs or in groups of 3 to prepare and to lead the seminar rather than working on their own. You can do it on your own. Some did it very successfully on their own, but it often works well with 2 or 3 students together, because then you have a chance to kind of brainstorm with the other students, run through different ideas and plans, and then not only do you have a chance to plan together, but also you can work together in the seminar, divide up the different kinds of questions, different parts of the discussion, and different people lead on different ones. So it just gives you a little bit more a chance to develop that particular skill of leading a discussion, and this is a skill that a lot of you will find useful in professional life. So it's good to get some practice and how that works. So, but we'll talk more about that in the actual first seminar. And I will be there. I'll be in all the seminars, obviously. But I will do my best to take a back seat and let the students who are leading do the actual leading. But I'll be there to jump in if I'm needed, to lend a hand, whatever. So it's a safety net there in my presence. Good. Let's say a little bit about the seminars then. So as I mentioned, there are 8 seminars and they run chronologically through the material. So we start with seminar 1 talking about the Cheka. Seminar 2, we look at Stalin's use of intelligence. And we're basically looking at the 1930s. And sort of this is the time when the Cambridge spies were recruited and beginning to kind of spy for the Soviets. So that's an really interesting time. Seminar 3, we move on to the Second World War, which obviously is crucial for the Soviets, particularly in terms of acquiring key technologies and information that they needed to build their own atomic weapons. And so looking at the atomic spies is a crucial part of what we look at in Seminar 3. Seminars 4 and 5 are sort of a pair that go together. We look at the Cold War. We first look at in Seminar 4, we look at the way that the Soviets use their intelligence services against their opponents in the Cold War. In other words, against Western states, against NATO members, for example. And in Seminar 5, we look at how the Soviets use their intelligence services against their own citizens and indeed against their own allies in the Warsaw Pact. So spying on enemies at home as much as working against enemies abroad. Seminar 6, we look at what happens to Soviet intelligence during the time of transition, during the Gorbachev period and during the 1990s when Yeltsin was president. Gorbachev came in, he wanted to change a lot of things about the way the Soviet Union worked, including the intelligence and security services. So we're going to look at this question of, well, what did he want to do and what did he actually manage to do? How much really changed in the late 1980s? And then when Yeltsin came into power, well, what was the Russian intelligence services looking like then? How much were they decimated by the experience of the collapse of the Soviet Union, the end of the Cold War, the end of the Communist Party and as a ruling party? A lot of things changed in the 1990s. What changed around intelligence? Seminar 7 and 8 are another pair of seminars where we're looking at the Putin period, so everything since 2000 basically. Looking firstly in Seminar 7 at how intelligence has been used by Putin to deal with internal issues, internal opponents, problems at home, dissent, disorder, these kinds of questions. And then the final seminar, we look at how is Putin been using intelligence services to deal with Russia's opponents. And this is where we come into some of the more contemporary debates people are often very interested in, like the Russian trolling, social media, internet hacking, election interference, all these kinds of questions. That's where we get into those in Seminar 8. Right, let's move on to talk about assessment. Seminar participation is 10% of the module mark, and that includes co-leading or leading one seminar. So you don't get a separate mark for the leading, it's just part of your seminar assessment. So you get a different mark, you get 1 mark for each of the 8 seminars, and then I add those marks together, divide by 8, and that's your 10% of your seminar participation. If you're absent and you give me a halfway decent reason for being absent, then that's excused and it doesn't hurt you, it doesn't help you. If you're absent and you can't be bothered to tell me why, then you get a 0. Or if you give me a really rubbish reason, then you get a 0 for that seminar. And it really hurts the overall average. But hopefully everybody will be very interested in participating and attending, and we won't have issues around unexcused absences. You'll be able to ask for mid-semester marks and feedback more or less halfway through the seminar series. So we do that really simply by asking you to upload a document onto Turnitin on Blackboard, and I give you a quick turnaround on that. Just after a few days, I give you the marks that you've got so far and a few sentences of comments, so you know how you're doing. But that's optional. You don't have to ask for that if you don't want to know. There are 2 essays in addition to the seminar participations. There's no exam in this module. You have a shorter essay of 2,000 words, which is worth 40% of the module mark. And then you have a longer essay of 2,500 words, which is worth 50% of the module mark. Now, although I give you essay questions, which you can answer, you can choose from, you can also, if you want to, set your own essay question. And that's true for both of the essays. You can do it for both of the essays or just for one or the other, or for neither. But what I find is that there are quite a few students who take the module who have very specific interests in Russian intelligence, and there are certain really specific things they want to have a chance to investigate in an essay, and my questions might not get at those things. So if you have a really burning issue that you want to investigate in the essay, by all means, develop your own question. But you will need to do that in connection with speaking to me. You'll have to get that question wording approved by me, because writing an essay question is harder than it sounds. There is a knack to it, because you don't want to ask a question that's so big that you can't possibly answer it in the word count that you've got. And you don't want to ask one that's so tiny and narrow and specific that you won't have any resources to use, and you'll be sort of struggling to find things to read. So work with me if you want to write your own essay question, but it's very rewarding, and the students who did it last year, I think, really got a lot out of it. So that's the assessment. Right, so final slide. I just wanted to highlight a few extras in the module. So there's the possibility that we might get a guest appearance, maybe via Skype, maybe in person, by 1 or 2 experts in the area. I'm not making promises and I'm not naming names at this point because I haven't actually approached anybody yet, but we did that very successfully last year with a personal appearance by Mark Galeotti, who's a leading kind of name in the field. So I'm hoping to get someone to join us, even if only on Skype, to do maybe a guest lecture or something, and give you a little bit of a different perspective on the topic. So that's something to be aware of. The question of Soviet and Russian intelligence has been dealt with extensively in documentaries and in films and dramas. And so in the module, I will point you towards ones that are relevant and places where you can go to have a watch. For example, just in the past few weeks, there's been a documentary series, 3-part series on Channel 4 about Putin, which you can watch on the Channel 4 catch-up site. There's also something called the Big Box of Broadcasts, which is a service available to university staff and students. So you can sign into it if you do a Google search on Big Box of Broadcasts and use your Aber email name, user ID and password. You can sign in and get access, and they have a whole lot of things that have been recorded that you can watch. There's the whole drama series, The Americans, which is about Soviet spies who lived in the US and pretended to be Americans under deep cover for a long time. And there's a lot about that that's actually very realistic. So I'll be alerting you to different kinds of documentaries and TV series that might be of interest to you. There's quite a few really interesting and well-informed blogs, which are written by experts in the area, and I'll have links on Blackboard to those and recommendations for things you might want to read, sort of extra information. And also, if you're interested in following me on Twitter, I often will tweet relevant links to interesting news stories or books or discussions or whatever, which are